The Catcher in the Rye, Alienation and Identity in Adolescence. J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye stands as one of the most profound explorations of adolescent psychology in American literature. Through the voice of 16-year-old Holden Caulfield, the novel presents a raw and unflinching examination of the complex emotions that define the transition from childhood to adulthood. As Holden navigates 3 tumultuous days in New York City following his expulsion from Pensy Prep, readers encounter a young man caught between the innocence he desperately wants to preserve and the adult world he finds reprehensible. The novel's enduring power lies in its nuanced portrayal of alienation and identity crisis, themes that continue to resonate with readers across generations who recognize in Holden's struggle their own adolescent search for meaning and belonging. The multifaceted nature of Holden's alienation. Holden's alienation manifests in 3 primary dimensions that collectively define his adolescent experience. His estrangement from society forms the foundation of his psychological state, as he consistently positions himself in opposition to the social institutions and cultural values that surround him. This alienation is not merely rebellious posturing but represents a fundamental incompatibility between Holden's moral sensibilities and what he perceives as a corrupt adult world. The novel presents alienation as both a protective mechanism and a destructive force. On one hand, Holden's self-imposed isolation shields him from the potential pain of human connection, particularly the kind of devastating loss he experienced with his brother Ali's death. By maintaining emotional distance from others, he attempts to avoid the vulnerability that comes with genuine relationships. However, this same protective instinct becomes self-defeating, trapping him in a cycle of self-destruction. His fear of human contact leads to alienation and loneliness, which encourages him to reach out to others, which excites his fear of human contact, which causes him to shut down, which leads once more to alienation. This paradoxical nature of alienation reveals the complexity of adolescent emotional development. Holden simultaneously craves human connection and fears it, creating an internal tension that drives much of the novel's psychological drama. His inability to form lasting relationships stems not from a lack of desire for companionship, but from his profound fear of loss and disappointment. Identity crisis and psychosocial development. Holden's struggles align closely with Erik Erikson's theory of psychosocial development, particularly the adolescent stage characterized by the conflict between identity and role confusion. Rather than successfully navigating this developmental challenge, Holden becomes trapped in a state of prolonged crisis where he cannot establish a coherent sense of self or envision a meaningful future. His identity confusion manifests in various behavioral patterns that deviate from social norms. After his expulsion from school, instead of confronting the problem directly or seeking help from authority figures, Holden chooses avoidance through aimless wandering. His journey through New York becomes a physical manifestation of his psychological state, directionless, impulsive, and increasingly desperate. During this period, he engages in behaviors that reflect his internal turmoil, smoking, drinking, visiting bars, and even hiring a prostitute, though he ultimately cannot go through with the encounter. These actions reveal a young man experimenting with adult behaviors while remaining fundamentally uncomfortable with adult responsibilities and realities. His identity crisis is compounded by his inability to envision himself in any conventional adult role, whether as a student, professional, or functioning member of society. This failure to imagine a viable future contributes to his sense of being trapped between childhood and adulthood, belonging fully to neither. The idealization and protection of innocence. Central to Holden's identity crisis is his obsessive desire to protect innocence, both in himself and others. This theme is most powerfully expressed in his fantasy of becoming the catcher in the rye, saving children from falling off a cliff while they play in a field of rye. This metaphor encapsulates Holden's wish to prevent others from experiencing the fall from innocence that he associates with entering the adult world. His protective instincts are most evident in his relationship with his younger sister Phoebe, whom he views as the embodiment of childhood purity. When he watches her sleep, Holden projects his own idealizations of childhood onto her. However, the novel gradually reveals the impossibility of preserving innocence indefinitely. Phoebe herself demonstrates that children are more complex and resilient than Holden's romanticized vision suggests, and she ultimately helps him realize that growing up is a natural and necessary process. The novel's climax occurs when Holden observes Phoebe reaching for the gold ring on a carousel, recognizing that he must allow her to take her own risks rather than constantly trying to protect her. This moment represents a crucial step in his psychological development, as he begins to accept that children like Phoebe should be allowed to grab the gold ring, that is, choose their own risks even though it could be dangerous. The phoniness of the adult world. Holden's alienation is intensified by his perception of adult society as fundamentally phony, a term he uses repeatedly to describe what he sees as the hypocrisy and superficiality of grown-up life. This disgust for phoniness represents more than mere adolescent criticism, it reflects a genuine moral sensitivity to the compromises and deceptions that characterize much of adult social interaction. His encounters throughout the novel reinforce his conviction that adults have sacrificed authenticity for social acceptance and material success. From his superficial interactions with former classmates to his disturbing experience with Mr. Antolini, Holden consistently finds evidence to support his belief that adulthood requires abandoning one's true self. This perception creates a seemingly impossible dilemma: he cannot remain a child forever, yet he cannot imagine becoming an adult without betraying his fundamental values. The novel suggests that Holden's critique of phoniness, while often overstated and self-serving, contains elements of legitimate social criticism. His alienation reflects not just personal psychological issues but also a broader cultural problem: the difficulty of maintaining authenticity and moral integrity in a society that often rewards conformity and superficiality over genuine human connection. Geographic and symbolic spaces of alienation. Salinger uses various physical spaces throughout the novel to externalize Holden's internal state of alienation. New York City serves as the primary symbolic landscape, portrayed as a cold, impersonal place where people are disconnected from each other. As Holden wanders through the city, feeling lost and alone, he encounters numerous other individuals who seem similarly isolated, reinforcing his sense that alienation is a universal condition rather than merely his personal problem. Specific locations within the city take on symbolic significance in relation to Holden's psychological state. The Museum of Natural History represents his desire for permanence and predictability in a world of constant change. His attraction to the museum stems from its unchanging nature. The exhibits remain exactly as they were during his childhood visits, offering a refuge from the unpredictability and complexity of real relationships and adult responsibilities. Hotels, bars, and other urban spaces reflect different aspects of his alienation, from the loneliness of anonymous accommodations to the hollow attempts at connection in social establishments. Even Pensy Prep, the school from which he has been expelled, represents his inability to find belonging in traditional institutional settings. His strained relationships with teachers and classmates at the school illustrate his broader difficulty in accepting authority and conforming to social expectations. The search for authentic connection. Despite his alienation, Holden's actions throughout the novel reveal a desperate hunger for genuine human connection. His attempts to reach out to various people, calling former classmates, seeking conversation with taxi drivers, trying to connect with his former teacher, demonstrate that his isolation is not chosen but imposed by his psychological barriers and social circumstances. The tragedy of Holden's situation lies in his simultaneous need for and fear of emotional intimacy. His brother Ali's death has left him with a profound understanding of how painful loss can be, making him reluctant to form new attachments that might result in similar grief. This creates what the novel portrays as a vicious cycle. His fear of loss leads to isolation, which increases his loneliness and desperation for connection, which in turn heightens his anxiety about potential loss. His few moments of genuine connection, particularly with Phoebe and, to some extent, with his former teacher Mr. Antolini before that relationship becomes complicated, suggest that healing is possible but requires overcoming his defensive mechanisms. The novel implies that breaking free from alienation requires accepting the risks inherent in human relationships, including the possibility of disappointment and loss. The complexity of adolescent development. The Catcher in the Rye presents adolescence not as a simple transition period but as a complex psychological landscape fraught with contradictions and emotional intensity. Holden's experience illustrates how adolescent development can become stalled when young people are unable to successfully navigate the competing demands of maintaining their authentic selves while adapting to adult social expectations. The novel's portrayal of adolescent problems, including protection of innocence, disgust for adult world, and alienation from society, demonstrates how these issues greatly impact his behavior and attitudes. Holden's erratic and impulsive behavior, his negative attitudes toward almost everyone he encounters, and his inability to envision a positive future all stem from his failure to resolve these fundamental developmental challenges. Yet the novel also suggests hope for recovery and growth. Holden's eventual breakdown and hospitalization, while representing the culmination of his psychological crisis, also provide the necessary pause for reflection and potential healing. His decision to tell his story indicates a willingness to examine his experiences and perhaps gain insight into his patterns of self-destruction. Conclusion: the enduring relevance of alienation and identity. The Catcher in the Rye continues to resonate with readers because it captures universal aspects of the adolescent experience while providing a nuanced exploration of how personal trauma can complicate normal developmental processes. Holden's struggle with alienation and identity reflects broader questions about authenticity, belonging, and the difficulty of maintaining one's values while participating in an imperfect society. The novel's psychological realism lies in its recognition that adolescent problems cannot be easily resolved through simple solutions or adult advice. Instead, Salinger presents the painful process of psychological growth as requiring time, support, and often professional intervention. Holden's journey illustrates that overcoming alienation and establishing a stable identity are not automatic outcomes of reaching adulthood but active achievements that require courage, self-awareness, and the willingness to risk authentic connection with others. Through its unflinching portrayal of one young man's psychological crisis, The Catcher in the Rye offers insight into the complex emotional landscape of adolescence and the ongoing human struggle to find meaning and connection in an often indifferent world. The novel's enduring power lies not in providing easy answers but in honestly depicting the difficulty and necessity of growing up while maintaining one's essential humanity and moral integrity.